I would like to ask you a couple of questions that I'm interested in, and actually pointing more at the problem side of things, because I'm very excited to hear how much you like it, obviously. But I know there's always challenges rolling this out. So I would like to dig into some of those issues, and then we would like to take questions from the audience and see how we can kind of steer that conversation into a direction that everybody will benefit from. So you essentially said it was a year ago when you got the first 400 emails of Peter, and then
that was I think I did respond to the first one though. Actually, I think I did. But yes, we've had a lot of exchanges, and yeah.
How long did it actually take you to roll it out internally from kind of starting to do security assessments, IT analysis, and all that process until you got the kind of, you felt like it was used productively by actual
So from
users?
the first email from Peter to actually the first, say, 2 solicitors using it on a case.
Yeah.
I know, but it probably took, but this wouldn't be an ayfie thing, because of our own internal processes and resources, let's put it that way. It probably took us a month from signing the contract to connecting and getting it going, but not anything to do with ayfie. It was more of our own internal, resources. So it was probably 10 months, I'd say. Right. But that had nothing, that was more us getting it through what it needed to go through, yeah.
Which I think is an important piece of information, because I think when you kind of look at it from a domain expert perspective, things should go quicker.
Yeah.
But those 9-10 months actually match our experience with many of our clients that have to push a piece of software through their internal processes, get IT approval, get hardware in place, get the contract through all that. So I think it's important to understand how long that can take from the first contact and you're understanding that software is actually useful to you, to actually being able to use it in production. Yeah, that's the right term. How long did it take you to be comfortable enough with the software from kind of when you started engaging with us to actually suggesting it for use out in the field? Do you know that?
For us, it's possibly a little bit different in that we have to try and sell it to our clients before we can use it. So we have to be fairly comfortable with it before we can tell somebody else that they should be using it, because ultimately, and this hasn't happened, but ultimately if the software fails, it's on us kind of thing. We're the ones who end up paying for it. So I guess for us, a couple of months, we had it sort of built in, I guess, and everything was there ready to go. But like I say, we have to try and convince somebody else to use it before we can really get into the nuts and bolts. But ayfie were good enough to give us sort of like a demo, sort of sandpit environment that we've been playing around in to make sure that we are comfortable enough. But that's taken us sort of a couple of months to get our heads around how it works and those sorts of things. Yeah.
So how did you approach that? How did you kind of make yourself comfortable with the software? What kind of tests did you run?
So I've done a few bits with comparing the same data set using ayfie, using relativity, and how easy I found that. I am an analytics expert or whatever in relativity. I have that certification. I still find it a bit confusing. So it was one of those things where I was kind of like, I want to know how these things compare against each other and how easy it is for me to use, and I want to make sure that I'm comfortable. So I'm the sort of person who, me personally, when I'm learning something, I want to try and break it. I want to try and use it myself, and I want to get into it and get really stuck in and try and work out how it works for myself. So we had sort of that sort of aspect where you could get in and try it yourself, and I sort of encouraged my team to do that. Our managing director is a really good is a really good influence on trying to encourage us to do things like that, get really involved in things. But then also we have that sort of more formal, okay, here's a demo, here's some videos, this is how you use it. So we kind of did both sort of things, where sit back and listen, and then also get stuck in to get your head around it.
So what you compared it to was really just relativity analysis. You didn't compare it to any other
No.
external
No, I've
vendors
not.
we're not going to name here?
Yeah, no, none of the other company X's that are out there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. So you said it kind of spread by itself through the company. Did you do anything specific to then onboard users or educate them about how they can use the system? Or, as you said, manage expectations to make them understand what they can do? Or did you just kind of let them play with it?
With the first, let's call it teams of lawyers that were using it for particular cases, I would grab that team and we'd have a half hour or whatever it might be, just me showing them what it could do. I would already have connected their data to but they asked for it,
right?
Because they had heard of it through the grapevine. That's not to say that we are not going to have proper the formal proper thing, but because it's just been we were trying to roll it out slowly, but that just proved impossible because it filled such a gaping need in our company that it tried to expand at a much faster rate than I could actually. We can control it because you can obviously control access to it, but there was quite a demand. But we did have training sessions, with the teams of lawyers that were working on it on particular cases. We're small enough that it's so intuitive. There are a few key things that we do with it, and as long as the lawyer knows, once I do a search, how do I get those documents? How can I? It's not. It may not be bleeding obvious on a couple of things that we need to do with it. So, there's like 3 or 4 things that I had to figure out myself. Those are the 3 or 4 things that I make sure that every new user knows. Right. And the rest of it, I'm fairly confident that they can get to.
Okay.
But yeah.
So at this point, you don't have a formal onboarding process or kind of a training sessions or?
We do have plans to set that up.
Right.
I'm waiting for the final connections to be made. And we have a couple of the infrastructure issues to sort out, and then we will have a series of training sessions. Okay. And we're quite keen to use it in other ways actually, and I think getting the whole firm involved in that is going to be quite exciting. So.
All right. So how much effort do you think it will be to get a more non-technical user up to speed using that sort of tool? Because some of them obviously are kind of in the Google mindset or in the Amazon shopping mindset as you.
That's a lot easier mindset than relativity.
Exactly. So how much training do you anticipate you have to put into?
For our current use case, I really can show a non-techie lawyer within 15 minutes. It's pretty quick. Because because they know what they're searching, they know what it's connected to because it's bleeding obvious. They can see that they're searching in that database over there, and they search. And they'll want to know: do you use your normal Boolean searches? Is there some guide somewhere? They'll ask a couple of questions, but I'd say these filters down the side. It's like online shopping and. It is what it is. They'll ask the usual questions of, if I tag this document, what does that mean? Because in the relativity world, you correct me if I'm wrong, you tag a document, but you're in the context of people can see that tag. That's not the way it works in Locator. Right. And so you need to explain the differences of those sorts of things that lawyers would expect. I explain a couple of those differences because that's what I thought when I was first using it. But that's like 15 minutes because I sort of know the 10 questions that I had that they'll go to. So.
Okay, that sounds great. How do you handle onboarding of the people who actually decide to use it? How much effort goes into that, and is there like a formal process around it?
So we tend to do with new clients or with clients who are being onboarded for the first time in a while. We tend to do training sessions on relativity itself because it's not the most intuitive of products. So we'll sort of formally include rollouts of the relativity training and also include ayfie in that as well for people who are a bit more, aware of relativity and feel a bit more comfortable. It's kind of going to be done on sort of an ad hoc basis. we've introduced ayfie, let's say set aside 15 minutes to train you. It is pretty intuitive, and the people who have sort of seen it have sort of said, oh, that seems fair enough. If I've got any questions, I'll give you a call. Let's finish this now. I mean, the people that we're talking to are busy. Every 6 minutes counts. So so we try and do things, tailor things as much as possible to them. But yeah, we'll try and formalize it as much as possible for new people, give people a bit more tailored for those who are a bit more aware of relativity and when it's just ayfie they need to know. And then for others, it's kind of like a 5-minute conversation of this is it. Got any questions? Give us a call. Yeah.
Very, very nice. You both mentioned there's a commercial aspect to that. I mean, software does cost money. So how do you handle the kind of dreaded return on investment conversation? I mean, let's start with you. I mean, how do you get people to actually invest in adding ayfie to an offering, and how easy do you find that? Do you kind of do that in a formal way at all, or?
It's like drawing blood from a stone sometimes. It's hard. I think we're finding it difficult to convince people to, particularly lawyers, to move away from something that they already know and they already know works. And I think that's always a struggle when you're bringing something new in. So we're trying to do it in ways where we're sort of either demoing it or sort of showing off what it can do and saying, look, just try it, and we're sure you'll be convinced. In terms of return on investment, I very purposely studied law and avoided any talk of maths. I leave that entirely up to senior management when it comes to pricing and sort of working those things out. So unfortunately, I'm possibly not the best person to answer that question.
That is not a problem.
But yeah.
All right. So how did you handle that? Did you have to go through that exercise of kind of proving that it makes sense to invest in that piece of software, or since it filled such an obvious need, was that sort of an automated?
Yeah, it did fill such an obvious need. There was, yes, in some senses, that sort of expenditure though doesn't go down, lightly. So there was, there was convincing, there was proving. There weren't, there was not a significantly detailed commercial analysis as such, and we're not monitoring it as such. Right. The monitoring is more. The monitoring is more. People are doing their jobs faster. There's less gripes going to IT. People are happier. There's less angst. There's less, whinging. That's the measure at the minute.
So you monitor the angst level?
Yeah.
I like that. I should be doing that.
I'm sure there's a philosophy on how one measures happiness, but that's not filtered into our firm.
Okay, that's interesting. So let's hand it over to the audience. Any questions from you guys?
Can you explain the interrelationship between inspector and locator?
Right. I was afraid of that question because the answer might take a long time. Generally, the tools are relatively similar because they are both centered around extracting metadata from documents, from the document content, and then exposing them through search and filter interfaces. So they are similar in that regard. Locator is much more geared towards connecting to enterprise systems. So basically you connect to an Exchange server, you connect to HiQ, you connect to file server, and it's bringing in live data all the time. So it's kind of constantly going out and bringing in data. When you receive an email, it will show up in Locator kind of a minute later, which means it's online in that sense, but that also means it can do a little less analysis on the data than Inspector can do, being an offline tool. So since you're always getting new data in, you do sort of the basic extraction, you do metadata analysis, you get access to that data quickly, but you can't do, for instance, email thread reconstruction on your entire enterprise data set. So that's not a feature that we offer there. On the other hand, Locator has a very strong emphasis on retaining access control lists. So basically, what somebody has permissions to access in Exchange or in SharePoint or on the file server, they will have access to in Locator and nothing else. So it's replicating permissions from the source systems. Inspector is a different animal. You basically throw a huge pile of data in, then you let it do its job, which might take hours or days, potentially, if it's a huge data set. And then you get access to all this enriched metadata, email threads, dedupe information, and all that stuff you would expect from a text analytics tool. But when you bring in new data, you basically have to incrementally repeat that process. So it's more a steady state driven tool, and it doesn't care about access rights because you basically have a collection that represents a project, and whoever has access to that collection has access to all the documents within it. So that's the main difference. Having said that, we are constantly looking into possibilities to bring those two closer together, share more technology, share more features, potentially at some point merging them completely. However, in the discussions we've had with users of these tools, it turns out that the workflows and the UI component and the user experience you would want is different. So we'll probably always keep two different user experiences on those tools. We might share more and more of the feature set and just introduce sort of a batch mode of a locator or an online mode of inspector and just bring them together that way. I will later show, kind of do a 5-second demo of inspector so you can see how that looks, and locator is just kind of a scaled down version of that analysis, but with live connectivity to source systems and access control built on top of that.
Sorry if I can.
Sure.
We did have difficulty deciding between the two, as it were, because to be honest, I don't think we understood the difference between the two. And there's probably, if we could just pick up a couple of more things and stick it into locator, we probably don't really, we can't see why it can't come together. But I know there's huge masses of underlying things. But we would love to have a couple of things from Inspector. And I haven't seen Inspector so recently, but it's hard. It was hard for us to go for one or the other because we wanted it to be one and the same, and we could have used that interface or our interface. So it's interesting.
I think the one of the reasons why it's so different and unnecessarily different maybe at times is that it originates in the need. Locator basically originates in the need to point it to your corporate data, which means you have a very strong emphasis on permissions, on reliability, on freshness, kind of getting the data in real time, and also not exposing what you don't want to expose. And I can talk to that a little later when I show the Inspector tool. There are features in Inspector that would expose facts about the data in an indirect way, but you could still draw conclusions of what you have in your data set. And if you're looking at the corporate environment, you might not want to be able to do that. Whereas Inspector doesn't really care about that because it's meant to throw a case in, essentially, and then it's supposed to expose all the facts to everyone, right? So it's a challenge to bring them together, but we'll work more and more about that. Hopefully adding stuff that you need to Locator very quickly. All right. Other questions at this point? No. Okay, so I would like to take just a couple of seconds really, or a couple of minutes to show you Inspector, because it might have been a little abstract from the slides, just show what we're about. And then if there's more questions about that, we can answer them. Otherwise, we can have some more drinks. So this is a demo built on the Hillary Clinton email data set. So we brought in the Hillary Clinton emails that she put on her private server, and everybody in eDiscovery is probably very grateful for that because it gave us another data set besides Enron. So that was ingested into ayfie Inspector. So this is a tool that has been integrated with Relativity to facilitate e-discovery processes, e-discovery workflows. And what we are doing when ingesting data sets is basically we're trying to, without any training or any kind of configuration from the user side, we're trying to just find out as much about the data as we can. And then we use that information that we found out to help the users search in it. So if you look at this, it looks like a Google-like search bar, and it is essentially that. But when you start typing, you'll actually immediately get surfaced all the stuff that we found in the data. So we found all these organizations in the data. We found all these people in the data. We found all these terms and combinations of terms in the data. We found these locations. And as you can see, I typed SAR. It's even doing that approximately. So it will find Goldman Sachs because it's so prominent, although it would be a typo in that case. And then you can go in and you can basically say, okay, Goldman Sachs is interesting, so I'm going to filter down my 32,000 email data set to the stuff containing Goldman Sachs, and then you get only these 12 results. And what that kind of gives you is, on the one hand, it gives you the results in the individual documents. Oh man, I'm a Mac user, so I have to bear with me using this Windows machine. It's super awkward. But it also gives you sort of a table of contents, what you have in the segment that you're currently looking at. So now in this segment, you have these specific locations. So in relation to the emails containing the Goldman Sachs information, you have Washington, America, Jersey City, Ohio, and Arizona. And you have these additional organizations that are kind of co-referenced in this data set. And now you can go in and say, okay, I need another axis of analysis because I'm just a nerd that way. So if you had a screen that actually had a decent resolution, you could see what kind of locations do I have in this data set for these 12 emails. And scrolling up awkwardly, you can also say, so how do they change over time? So let's say in a period of emails that went back and forth that is now limited to 2010 to 2012, we can make it even smaller. These are the dominant locations in that data set that pertain to the segment that you're currently looking at. And you can even, if you manage to find the button, you can even look through the changes over time. So basically, over the course of the email conversations that went back and forth, how did these terms kind of get more dominance and less dominance in the context of that data set? And what that gives you is basically just many different ways to look at that data set segmented along different axes, like the who, what, where, and when, that is kind of on some of those folders probably, or the timeline, or if you are interested in that particular piece of information, you could look at how do users actually represent emotions in their emails. Come on, scroll down here. So you can filter by emojis used, for instance, if you're into that. And I, when we were asked to build that in, I was like, this is so trivial, why would anybody want that? But it's, if you look at, for instance, one of the best data sets to look at for this is airline ratings. So you can get a lot of insight into how these ratings differ from airline to airline by looking at the emojis that people use in these documents. You can extract all the money values that are mentioned in those emails. You can basically look at emails mentioning specific amounts of money. So you can track that information across the data set. And you can, of course, look at all the GDPR-related data points like personally identifiable information. At this point, it's kind of folded down because ayfie extracts 194 data points at this point, and we're adding to that constantly. So you will see if there's a Danish credit card number in your data set somewhere, you will see it here, or something more relevant. We also add, as a kind of machine-oriented feature, we add clusters, automatically generated clusters. So the machine will look at the data set, and apart from the documents that, from the entities that are contained, we will also try and group the data into lumps that are kind of similar from a topic perspective. So emails talk about similar stuff, or Word documents dealing with similar topics will be clustered together, and then you can drill into these clusters if you manage to click on them. Yeah, you can drill into these clusters and they will show up subclusters. And the labels of these clusters are actually, they might seem a little weird to people not used to working with this type of information. But if you're used to working with machine-generated clusters, some of these labels actually give you a lot of insight about what's in that particular document set. On the other hand, if you don't want the machine to decide what the category looks like, You can also add your own taxonomy or your own categories and have the machine auto-classify the documents into that taxonomy. Right, took a couple more seconds than I anticipated, but that's about it. An inspector, obviously you can ingest arbitrary sizes of data, you can connect it into your relativity, you can get all that information that I've shown here back into the relativity workspace and use it there. You can tag documents in this interface, and then you will see the tag appear in relativity, so you can kind of continue working with that or put that document set into a production workflow if you want to. Any questions about that?
Just a quick question around time to get to, I guess, to these screens. Have you got any kind of metrics around, for example, if it was to ingest maybe a million documents a week, typically how long would it sort of take to actually give you something that you could use if you wanted to use exactly particular features?
1 billion documents?
A million.
Oh, 1 million.
Or any other metrics as well?
Right, so we do measurements. It is kind of hard to say. So the Enron data set that usually takes like 1-2 hours. But that's a very specific data set. So the documents are not big. There's like predominantly just one language in there. So that varies wildly depending on how the documents are distributed. We have had data sets with 200,000 documents that took 4 days to ingest and process because they contained huge Chinese documents that we had to tokenize and parse apart, which is more computationally intensive in Chinese. We've also had data sets of 12 million emails that were predominantly English, and the threads were relatively evenly distributed, and that just took like 4 hours to ingest. So it's hard to predict, and that is always a problem, but it's usually quicker than you'd expect, I would say. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm going to ask a difficult question now.
Sure.
Sorry, but some of us are familiar with brain space as a technology.
Right.
An XLP. Is there anything in the underlying technology that's new or different to what we're seeing in those other sort of smart text analytics solutions?
It's actually everything that is different. I don't know about new. I mean, nothing's really new under the sun. I would say that if you compare, for instance, just the entity extraction piece that we have to the entity extraction that BrainSpace added through the Basis Tech partnership, or entities that NextLP extracts, the idea is obviously the same. We want to know about your documents by looking at the semantically meaningful entities that are contained. I would say generally we are quicker and more precise, but anybody would say that in this situation, so you have to see for yourself. We also use different approaches to entity extraction than those tools. So we don't, I can't scroll here. We don't just use lists of stuff and throw them at the data, but we rather look at linguistic context. So the company ayfie has actually been created in 2016 through a merger of a search company and a university spin-off in Munich that dealt exclusively with natural language processing. So the way we do entity extraction is we don't throw a huge list of stuff at the system, but we rather look at the sentences and understand how certain types of entities are embedded within these sentences. So, for instance, Sarah Island went on vacation. Would for us, for ayfie, mean Sarah Island is a location, is a person. Sorry. I went on vacation to Sarah Island would hint the ayfie engine to consider it a location because it's embedded in a different linguistic context. And I think that's a huge difference. So we are able to ambiguate things that way. We're able to find things that we've never seen before without you training on it, right? So for instance, these things, if you look at the term list, I think that's the one that illustrates this quite nicely. This is stuff that is basically just extracted, and some of it is not useful, some of it is very useful if you drill down to a specific topic. That is just extracted based on linguistic context. So you can see that climate change was picked up, although nobody ever kind of feed climate change into the system anywhere. It just so happens that the documents used the phrase climate change in a context that told the engine, okay, this is an important phrase. So it picked it up and put it into this representation, so you can filter on it. And that works for a lot of interesting entities that we can't classify because we don't know what they are, but we know from the linguistic context that they are important. And especially in e-discovery situations and in e-discovery-driven workflows, I found that people like that a lot. Just get a list of stuff that is important, no matter if it's, we can't put a tag on it, we can say it's a location, we can say it's a, I don't know, it's a concept or something, but we know it's important. So you can look at it and you can filter on it and you can see how many documents actually contain that phrase or a similar phrase. And that shows very nicely how our entity extraction differs from the mentioned technologies. On top of that, we kind of have the full set of classic text analytics like email threading, near duplication, classification, predictive coding, potentially, depending on how you integrate it. So we kind of are the union of many of those tools, but we take a very linguistic approach to things, which also has an advantage. I mean, a disadvantage. We support, at this point, I think, 13 languages, but not more, because we don't use statistics, we use linguistics, so we have to know the language. But that's just a price we are very happy to pay for the precision that it gives us. I want to thank you again. It was great. Good to have you here, and thanks for listening, and go out, grab a drink, mingle, and have fun.